Mars is opposite Saturn and Neptune. Let's talk about it. So, this configuration has been interesting for me. I want to first start out with Neptune. So, a lot of people talk about how they can only see the negative with Neptune, which is understandable. It's about disillusion and delusion and illusion and intoxication and confusion and nebulousness and escapism and addiction. And yeah, that's very much present there. But it's also about union. So yoga is Sanskrit for union. That's literally what the word means. And so I was doing some work yesterday, and my friend, who is a yoga practitioner, mentioned that yoga is also about putting yourself in uncomfortable positions and sitting with that discomfort and surrendering to it. And through that sitting with that discomfort, you surrender and you open up, and that is part of the yoga. That's part of the union process. So union isn't always going to be comfortable. It's probably going to be confusing, and it's going to be disillusioning, and it's going to dissolve what you thought was, a structure that you thought was in place for safety. But to change and to transform and to be healed and cleansed, we often have to let go of what we thought was correct or right. So with that said, I think that we find this aspect, we are challenged with disillusionment of what it means to be strong, being opposite Mars, and also Neptune being in Aries. A disillusion of what it means to be powerful, independent, and confronting our delusions of what we thought strength was, and putting ourselves in that position of that form and sitting with that discomfort and being like, man, if this wasn't strength, if this wasn't power, if this wasn't authority, if this wasn't individualism, and this wasn't passion, then what is? And thus we start practicing the yoga of Mars. We can call it that. The yoga of being actually strong. What does that look like? And it might look like different things for different people. And so we have like a mystical aspect of strength. What does that look like? I think Mars Neptune aspects, I have Mars opposite Neptune natally, and it has taught me to become a warrior on an inner plane. What does it mean to be a warrior in general? For this, it's a inner warrior of the emotional realm, of the spiritual realm, and really pushing forward to understand what that means. And I had a lot of beliefs around what that meant as a practitioner of an organized religion. And I thought that I was doing good, and then I had to sit with this discomfort of like, wow, my worldview has been really challenged. And so I took it upon myself to be an entrepreneur with the Mars energy, as it were, to find my own meaning, my own path, go my own way, and boldly go where no one has gone before, in the realms of spiritual union, a mystical connection with the divine. And I feel very, very satisfied and very fulfilled with what I have learned. And I'm still learning. So that's a big Mars Neptune thing. And also with Neptune being conjunct Saturn, we're understanding the disillusionment with what it means to have boundaries, I think, and structures, and what that means. Like, an established structure that we felt comfortable in could no longer be working for us, could no longer be serving us. And what might have been safe before in the use of that structure and the implementation of that structure could now be constricting. And so the yoga of of responsibility, of maturity, of accountability, what we thought that was before, we could be putting ourselves we could find ourselves in an uncomfortable position of what that means, and having that challenged. And with Neptune, it's escapism too. So do we sit with the discomfort and surrender to it ultimately? That allows us to really lean in to that position? Or do we try to run away from it by numbing ourselves, by with escapism, with distraction, with substances, or something that removes us from the immediacy of the present moment? Because yoga is also a practice of presence. And so we can choose. Do we decide to be present here, or do we try to run away? And sometimes you need to excuse yourself. Sometimes you need to remove yourself from something that you just feel you cannot handle. It does come down to a question of capacity, I think. But also, like, I found that leaning into that discomfort really unlocks some potent, magical understandings that we may not have had access to before. And so, like, with Mars opposite Saturn, like, you might really feel like you're fighting for this boundaries and fighting for this structure, and while at the same time those structures being challenged, those old ways being challenged, and Saturn asking us to step through a threshold to a new way of being. But what is old first needs to die so we can make room for the new. And Saturn and Mars both do that. They are both malefics, and thus about death and stopping and no, as opposed to the benefics being about yes. So we find our no, we find the discomfort with sitting with no, with sitting with what we thought was strength, what we thought was power, what we thought was responsibility and prudence and planning and strategy and meticulousness, and really sit and meditate objectively on that. Saturn is objective observation and karma. So we find out what that means to us and implement those structures so we can have a truly fulfilling life. But first we have to sit with the discomfort of what that might mean. So Mars, Saturn, pressing the gas and the brakes at the same time. What we labeled as a firm understanding of what it means to be a lone wolf, what it means to be individualistic, how that might need to die. It's going to be uncomfortable, but I hope that we find our genuine yoga position, as it were, and surrender and lean in to that discomfort to step through a threshold into a new way of being. Love you.